This is Views in Paradox. Classics.
Welcome, any and all, to VIP Classics, a spin-off show we have going, sort of a highbrow version of the Views in Paradox Film Club podcast, in which three self-proclaimed filmmakers are going over some seminal classics and dissecting them as intelligently and as best we can. This week's episode is covering The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman's seminal classic from 1957, which put him onto the world stage. This film it won the jury prize at Cannes Film Festival way back in 1957, and really kind of put him and Max von Sydow onto the world stage. So this film was nominated for this podcast by Jose. This was my first watch of it. I guess I kind of glossed over our intros. I'm your host, John Olson. I am joined for the entirety of this series by Jose Venutolo. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
And Danielle Gibson. Also welcome.
Hey, what's up? Hello.
With some awesome green lipstick today. That's right. I called it out.
It's okay. No, it's okay. You gotta go big or go home.
So if you're just listening, maybe peek over on the video to check that out. While I'm at it, if you're listening to this, please give us a like, a subscribe, depending on how you're watching it. Maybe leave a review if you like it. This will be a spoiler-filled episode, as all of our episodes are. We'll probably go over the plot just a little bit, but it helps to have seen the film. If you haven't, though, and are just kind of curious about some thoughts on Seventh Seal, by all means, stick around. Give it a listen. Jose, I'd like to start with you. Why this film? Have you seen it before? Give us a little bit of lowdown.
Okay. Well, I had seen it before, but it was a long time ago, and this watched felt like a first watch to a certain degree. Like I remember certain scenes, I remember certain moments, but I could not, like, if you asked me before this watch, I would be like, I cannot tell you the plot from beginning to end. Now I feel that I can. The reason why I chose it, when we were determining the kind of movies, I had to switch a couple of choices that I had that were a little more obscure or difficult to find, or maybe like adding too controversial for like what we're doing right now. So then my mind went to like a safe bet, from something that is not as common, but is well known as Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal, which is I feel that this movie set a lot of cliches and standards, or characters that have been portrayed over and over on several iterations, and then most people probably do not know that it comes from this film. And then I wanted also to portray that. I mean, that this is the personification of death that Bill and Ted uses, this personification of death that in Last Action Hero comes out of the screen. Like this is very much in the zeitgeist and have been like recreated, and then just like Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey, like the whole beginning had been, or the whole thing with the monkeys, and it's been recreated several times. So I wanted to choose this film because I knew that we could go into it and a lot of people could connect to it.
Yeah, it's our first film with dialogue so far. We're still black and white, and we will be for most of the run.
It's also our first non-German film.
Our first non-German film. We still have yet to do an American film, and it's going to be a couple more before we get to some of those. But yeah, Swedish film. Danielle, what are some of your kind of just initial thoughts, I guess, before we kind of get into more of the nitty and the gritty?
It's the word that comes to mind is iconic. It of course, it sets the standard for a lot of movies that come after it. But it does it so well. I don't want to get too into every single scene, which because we're about to do that, but I feel like it made its point. It did it in such a beautiful, simple but complex way. I don't know if that makes sense, because it's like you can watch every scene, you can like get like just the first impression, and but there's so much to think about for later, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's very
deceptively
concise.
simple, maybe.
Deceptively
Deceptively
simple. Yes.
simple. That's an excellent, yeah. So it made me feel very like I felt like it was very consumable, but I felt very emotional after, but also like it made me emotional in a like a somber kind of way, but also I had more appreciation for life at the same time. It
I
was
felt very
very
pensive
beautiful in that way.
after viewing this
Yeah.
movie. Just kind of like thoughtful. Like I wasn't really
Mm-hmm.
sad per se, but I was just kind of like in a weird, like, even state after I came out of this movie of just like, huh, what is life? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like on this watch I felt that it's the kind of film that's not trying to hide its meaning but just be very blunt and upfront with it, and that makes it easier to follow. But I mean, depending on where you are within that concept, within that thought about death and meaning, and how you would feel in the face of it, I feel that depending on where you are in life, this film could give you a lot of food for thought at the beginning of your life, and then towards the end of your life, it just feels more like, or at least like on the middle of it, that's where I am. It feels more like these are considerations that I have had, these are thoughts that I have had, and it's just like it feels nice to know that other people before me had them in the same philosophical structure that the film presents. But it's not hiding. It's not hiding within these scenes. It's just very blunt. This is what it is about. The dialogue is basically almost like narrating the plot, which makes it easier to consume, to my point of view.
Yeah. This film was not what I was expecting. I was expecting something a little bit, I don't know, more. I was expecting something existential, but I was expecting something moodier or like more somber, more morose. And it's oftentimes very playful. You do kind of feel like you're watching a stage production a lot of the times, which I know it began as a stage production that Bergman wrote and then adapted into a film a couple years later. Just to give a quick kind of overview synopsis, there is a knight, Antonius Block, played by Max von Sydow, who has just come home from the Crusades with his squire, Jans in tow. And right up front, death comes for him. And he challenges death to a game of chess in order to buy himself some extra time on the earth. And supposedly, if he wins, then he will get out of death altogether. That's sort of the terms that they set. Then the rest of the movie is a journey sort of from the shore to his ancestral home. He's a lord, as knights in the Crusades were. And so it's a journey from the shore to his castle, and along the way they pick up a motley crew and they examine life in the time of the plague and just sort of some medieval tropes and anachronisms, and we question whether God exists and what is the point of life, and have this little kind of ongoing duel with death, if you will. So there's a lot more nuance to the film, and we will talk about it kind of under the premise that you've seen it. So I do recommend watching it. I think this was the easiest watch so far, for sure. We're only 3 in, but I felt like this one was a really kind of easy, pleasant watch compared to Metropolis, which was very dense, and Nosferatu, which just feels really old. for lack of a more nuanced way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't write very many notes. I don't know about you guys. Jose wrote a fair number of notes more than I did. I just kind of like let it wash over me because there is something simple about it. And I did have a number of questions of like, why is that there? I had kind of those, but I didn't really have kind of my usual like breakdowns of the film. I mean, Danielle, you're kind of nodding along with me.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your impression too? Like what did you make of this this film?
Yeah. I only wrote and when I say a page of notes, I have like a notebook that's like I forget what size it is. It's not like a full sheet of printer paper. I wrote down like different thoughts that I had or things that they said, like questions that our knight said, especially when he first comes across the priest, who's actually death in disguise. I wrote more reactions that I had, like if I was confused. There was only one moment that I was confused. It was in the beginning when you first see them start their game of chess, and then later you see him walking across the beach, and I was like, oh, was that a dream? Is that really happening? Which is probably, is to be expected. And then you don't really realize it until he talks to the priest. So you're like, oh, this is like going on throughout the whole thing. And I kind of understood that's what it was like. It was used for the structure of it. But I feel like it just made me think a lot of things about life, and that's what I wrote, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or I wrote down different lines just because I felt like literally I wrote, holy shit, this guy's questions, like especially like that's like
deep.
because I was like surprised. I was like, oh, this guy is going through an existential crisis. Like it seemed like he was very faithful in his beliefs, and now he is like, why is it so cruel? Why is God so cruelly like unseeable, untouchable?
Right.
Like he's like outside of our senses.
And
we have
pitiless, it seems like
yeah.
the idea that you go on the Crusades, you're convinced to do it for God, and you come back to the plague, and just, death and kind of misery all around, but happiness too, right? I think that that is kind of like, for me, it was kind of like the overall message of the film was like, even amidst death and despair, there are moments to appreciate, right? There's like that scene where he really appreciates. But maybe it's a good idea to kind of break down some of the scenes. I think that might be a good way to talk about this. Though I think I wanted to kind of go off of what you said about the scene where death is disguised as a priest. So they come to a small church, and he goes to the confession, and he's talking to the priest, and at the end, it turns out to be death. But I had the feeling that he knew. You guys to me, it felt like, and he even kind of implies that later, because death uses the moment to like learn what his strategy is. But I felt like, why would he even bring it up with a priest? I feel like he kind of felt like he already knew he was talking to death. Did you guys have a different take on that interaction, or?
I took it. I didn't see it as him knowing it was death, because he did seem semi-surprised when he said, "Oh, I'll remember that," and he stood up and he's like, "Oh, you." But maybe that's just me seeing it for the surface level like presentation of it.
If you're trying to trick death, I feel like you'd have to be a little bit clever, right? Like you couldn't let him
not
know
to say it wasn't, but
that you're onto him.
Right. That's true.
Do you have a different take, Jose?
I mean, now that you mention it, you see them starting the game. Then the next time that you see them together is at the church, and then he reveals his next move, and then, as Danielle said, he seems genuinely surprised that is death. But there's a part of me that feels like you, John, like feels like he knew. And then later in the movie, he makes a move, and then Death said, "Now I'm gonna take your horse," and he says, like, "This is what I always wanted, because now you need to defend your king." So it makes me feel more like he pretended to not know it was Death, to trick him into give him a false move that he was intending to make, just to make Death not really know where he was going, and then it gave him enough time to keep alive, because like we know that at the end of the day you can beat it. But the certainty of these, I do not know, because I don't think that the movie makes it clear. But it's one of the assumptions. It's like that he was playing Death all along, and then Death just fell in the trap, and it's kind of like these two. It's the battle of wits between these two.
And I feel like there's like 3 or 4, if you count the first, kind of main like scenes where he actually is playing chess with Death. Most of the rest of the movie has, kind of acts like that's not a thing. Which I was kind of surprised at the beginning when the game is delayed. Like, I expected it to be much more like heady and cerebral, and then when it turned out to be like this kind of journey film, I was initially just surprised by that. But like the follow-up scenes are interesting because he's like, that's like he has that conversation with Death in the church, and then the next time they talk, they actually play, and we get that sort of back and forth. But at that point, he's already had this like happy moment that he says he'll remember. He gives like this really nice speech about it, and it seems like at that point he's like ready to accept his fate, right? And then he kind of pulls the like, "Oh, I fooled you," kind of bit, and
I'm gonna be real. I feel like I had almost an opposite interpretation of what you guys did, because I thought in that moment I felt like he was like on the retreat. I thought he was like trying to make up for having been found out, and he was like, "Oh yes, just like
maybe
you were supposed to this whole time." I don't know, but I feel like on the second watch, it's probably meant to be, you're probably meant to question that. But the thing that it makes me realize, it brings out this metaphor that like life is just a game of chess with death. Like, because in this world, at least, you see the youngest character, who's Michael, and then you see like everyone else who's older, and you see Mikhail, yeah, and everyone around. It's so easy to die. Like the world is so not friendly. There's so much like disease and death and like weird people who have either the oppression of like, oh, are we just going to sit around and be entertained by gestures and clowns and actors all day? Or are we going to go around the world whipping ourselves to like hope for a better life, but also make ourselves miserable? And to me, that makes me feel like it's just this big allegory, or this big just like reflection, or there's a quote I wrote. It said, the emptiness inside of us is like a mirror, that there's like this indifference that I have towards the emptiness in myself, and there's this amazing like zoom and push in at that moment. So it really stuck with me, and it made me think about it. So it just I feel like I just went like rambled, but I hope that made sense. It made me think of it as a whole.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point of like, the goal isn't necessarily to win, right? It's just to like drag it out. And I feel like there is a moment where like that moment with the chess piece and like the strategy, there's definitely this question of like, did he mean to do that, or is he just trying to like cover his own blunder? Right? But then later, he does trick Death during the game. When he knocks over the pieces, he helps the actor and Mikhail and the mother of Mikhail, the actor's wife and their kid. He helps them get away, right? By distracting Death with the game. Like, he uses it to prolong somebody else's life, right? He does like something truly noble. And in that sense, it is like a victory, right? He does kind of outsmart Death and trick him, at least for a time, right? Because, like, there's no getting around it, right? nothing and no one escapes me, as death tells us.
One thing between those two scenes that I feel like I'd have to watch it again to really come to my own conclusion, but the first scene where it's that beautiful scene where he's like, I'm going to remember this for a long time. First of all, I feel like we have to have a conversation on how beautiful of a scene that is. But before we get there, when Death reappears and he just walks up and like has their like playing chess, and in the background we see everyone just seemingly watching them, at least that's what it seemed. It seems so trippy, but like so purposefully done. Like it's like, we have, it's just, I don't know, it just seems so surreal to me. And then like later on, no one had the urgency of like oh, we have to escape death, we have to go. It's just people were like living in that moment. And then later on when the husband wakes up and he's like, oh, I see death, we have to go. Part of me was like, but if death's not there for them, like, do they have something to fear? But also they did just see, never mind. They saw all those like really horrifying.
I mean, just the idea of being in the presence of death,
But they were in the field is the thing, which is why I was like wondering why they felt it more so in the forest than in the field.
Maybe it's because they'd seen the guy die like, from horrifying the plague, things, right? Because it's pretty short. It's pretty close after that, right? Where they run into a guy who's got the plague in the forest, and they're just like, stay back, and they offer him no assistance. They let people die frequently, like, right? Because there's also
even the young girl.
Yeah, the young girl who's accused of a witch, which is actually, from what I understand, a historical anachronism, that like the witch hunts and the Black Plague didn't really happen at the same time, and also like didn't reach Sweden to the extent that they reached other parts of Europe. Like Bergman took a lot of liberties when it comes to historical elements, but I kind of forgive it because
I mean, I don't take this movie as like, historically accurate. I don't even think
it's trying to
it matters.
Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of forgave that because it seemed like they're like, she's the cause of the plague. Like, if we just kill her, the plague will go away. Like, it seemed like they were trying to make a reason for all the pain in the world.
And that sort of thing did happen in certain eras, especially.
They were doing the Nosferatu thing. Like, if you kill the vampire, then everybody just gets better.
Oh my god!
And I do kind of like that they take a moment where John says, I thought about killing the soldiers, but she's like almost dead anyway. like he kind of just goes like, is she worth saving? Yeah. And they're like, this girl's kind of gone crazy because of whatever's been done to her, / just whatever was wrong with her to get her accused in the first place. Like,
it's so interesting. I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
First. I had such mixed thoughts about that, because there was a moment where he was asking her the second time, like right before she was about to be put on the pyre, of like, oh, where's the devil? Can you see him? And she's like, oh, he's behind you. He's around us. And like, at first I'm like, oh, she's crazy. But then she says this thing, and I don't know if I just like pulled it out of it, but she's like, well, everyone else can see it, so why can't you? Like this kind of like assumption of, oh, everyone else believes that I'm crazy, so why aren't you like jumping on that? And so it kind of seemed like this like depressing. I questioned whether or not she was actually insane.
Yeah, I feel like it was the sense that everybody has said it to the point where she's like, well, it must be true. Like she's just kind of, it's like a resigned acceptance to the awfulness around her, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a coping mechanism. Like if you can't beat them, join them. Like you say, I'm possessed by the devil, and like she probably already tried to deny it, and like that obviously isn't going to work. So like at a certain point, it's just like, I see the devil. What of it?
But she might be making. I mean, this is the interesting thing about this movie, right? Like it's like you hear these things. Like it's a movie that is very dialogue driven. Like it says, Danielle said, like that you find yourself. I found myself writing down lines of dialogue because I go like, this is a beautiful way to put it, or this is a food for thought. She might be just saying like, like everybody's mad with this religious belief that there is a God and a devil, and she said like, why are you the only one who cannot see it? She's basically telling him, why are you questioning your faith? Like you just came back from the crusade. You're wearing the freaking cross across your chest, and then you don't believe that the devil is all around. I mean, when we mentioned, I don't know if it was during the podcast or before we started, that Danielle, you mentioned that you cried, and I like the scene where she's dying. That's where I found myself in tears because you see him being moved by what he's witnessing, and then the Squire comes in and says, "Look at her face." Like, what has she realized? What is she seeing that we are either not seeing or we're yet to be in that moment? And then he said, like, is she, and it just moved me because
Johns has a moment of like pure empathy with her.
Yes.
Where he's like, she is seeing what we will all see.
Yes.
She knows what all of us will eventually know. She knows death now while she's alive, and he like
and she's so young.
And she's so young. Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
The thing that got me, the specific phrase is where he said, "Is she looking at the face? Is she looking at the face of God, or is she looking just at emptiness?" And it's like that's his fear. That's his fear. His fear is just to have dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of something and then dying, and that something never. It's like God is silent. God is like.
It's the fear of every religious person.
It's like, is this a lie?
It's the reason I think initially religion started, right? That fear of the emptiness.
Right.
That fear that there is something beyond experience that is completely and utterly unknowable. And so we're gonna justify it in all the ways in which religion has justified, come up with, right? And like we've done it all over the planet, all across history, this like imagining of what happens when death, and I think it comes from that fear of the emptiness, right? That fear of not being able to appreciate what happened, right? of all of this, and it's very palpable in all of us, I think. And I wanted to kind of backtrack, Jose, to touch on something that you brought up, which is that Antonius Block is basically the only one we see question his faith. Everyone else is decided. And like Jans, I imagine, his Squire is like firmly in the atheist camp, right? He's already decided that it's all bullshit and that the Crusades were for nothing. We can see that with his conversation with the painter.
Yeah.
Early in the film, and just his take on how he treats people. Like he's got this sense of morality to himself, but he clearly doesn't believe in God or the afterlife.
He's so chaotic.
Yeah. Like he's kind of a nihilist to a certain extent. But he's a loyal nihilist to his, he's loyal to his master and to his own code. But we can tell that he's very decided. And most everyone else is kind of the other way, where they are fully enwrapped in their belief, right? From the flagellants to even the actor who sees the Virgin Mary in the first scene that we meet him, right? He wakes up in the morning and he sees a vision of the Virgin Mary, and he, it's like he is absolutely firm in his belief of the supernatural, of the of angels, but he also sees death, right? Does that tell us that it's all real, right? When Antonius Block is just questioning every moment, and death almost seems to confirm his fear that there's nothing. Like I wrote down the line, the one that really hit me was like the last time he talks to death before the end, he says, "Will you tell me nothing?" And death responds that I have nothing to tell. He's like, "I have no secrets." There is nothing. I am nothing. And I looked up some different translations, and like the ones I found online were different than the ones in the version that we watched. But they all kind of amount to that, right? Where death seems to confirm that there's no afterlife. There is nothing, right?
It's interesting because, like, when you see that scene and then you go back to the scene where he's a priest and Block is asking all of these questions, you see this look in his eyes where he's like, it's almost like he just doesn't have anything to give him. It's like he feels bad for him almost. Like, oh wow, you're having all these questions. I can't say anything. He has a reaction that you wouldn't think a priest would have, where
he offers no solace.
That's
right.
None, not at all.
That's not Death's job.
But it almost seems like he feels, yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, I feel like I had more to say, but I don't remember.
I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No. It's.
I feel that the character of the Squire, it's a cynic. It's a person that have seen
Definitely.
so many things, and then he goes through like every single piece of dialogue, unless he's doing something that feels noble and feels well intended, the rest of the time he's just complaining about life. He's just like, and most I say to,
he's got the thing where he loves love.
Yeah.
Love is perfect in its imperfection.
And the
He kept going back and forth with that though, because he
Yeah.
went to save the mute girl. I didn't realize until the end.
Yeah, she only says one thing in the whole film,
movie.
Yeah.
But he has this moment where he saves her, and you think like, oh yeah, he's a nobleman, and then he tries to kiss her, and she's like, not about it, and he's like, well, I could have raped you, like I could have, like you owe me this thing, and I was like, wow, he's trash.
I know,
but then he goes
makes
back
you go
and forth
so
with,
back
like,
and forth on
saving.
his character because there's also like I felt like you. I was like, oh wow, like way to just immediately make me hate you. But then like when they get to the girl who's about to be burned, and he's like, I considered killing all the guards. Like there's like 8 of them, and he's like, I considered killing it, but I just feel like what would we even be saving? And that kind of like brought him back around a little bit to me. But I do think calling him a cynic is accurate, Jose.
Well, like I was having actually a conversation last night about some of these topics. I mean, I'm not going to go in it, but there are certain behaviors that you witness in another person, and because of the times that we're living, then we assign much more to a certain behavior, a certain aspect of a person, and then I mean it's like what happened in politics these days. Like one single opinion could make you to the eyes of everybody stigmatized into one side or another. And I don't think that is like if we exist in a world that is discovering that there are more tones of grays than whites and blacks, then we need to also apply it to these. Like look, there is one thing that I don't know if it's true or not, but Berman is not necessarily a man that is being remembered for being good to women. And then this film is extremely misogynistic. This is film that like most of the jokes, most of the things that men do, or like when he sits and talks to the Smith, and then the entire dialogue is just complaining about like little details here and there, and they're making fun about like behaviors of women or things like. So this is not needed.
Yeah, and the blacksmith's wife, who has the most to do of all the women, is not painted in a particularly flattering light.
Correct. So then it's a film.
Right.
So it's a film. There is this thing that I've carried with Berman films, and I don't know if it's a personal perception. I have no idea. Like it makes me almost feel that Berman likes to make movies to try to explain how terrible of a human being he feels he is, because his movies explore aspects, and it's like the way that he decompresses the fact that he got married like 17 times, that probably he neglected all his children. Like, like he's this revered.
It reminds me of Vertigo. If you guys have ever seen Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, it is a very self-damning kind of self-reflective in a very unflattering light about the way in which Alfred Hitchcock himself treats women, in kind of a very similar vein to this. It also kind of reminds me. One sec, Danielle. It also kind of reminds me of when we talked about Nosferatu, and kind of that like zeitgeist element and what is unintended versus what is intended, and how like, and even in Metropolis, like that was a movie that like, a Jewish filmmaker made that got turned into propaganda. And like, there is kind of this element that like we operate within a society, and as that changes, we have no idea how our work will age. Right. And so there's like those elements where we talk about Johns that like, how they aged versus how were they perceived at the time versus what is the commentary of the time in which the film is supposed to take place, right? Where, the idea of rape to a crusader might seem very casual, like the Bible is full of crap like rape and mass rape, history even. So it's, there is potential commentary on that. Danielle, what were you gonna get into?
I think I read a little bit on Wikipedia about Bergman's life, where, and I don't know if I misread it, so I'd have to double check, but I think it basically supports what you were saying, Jose, about him having this like resentment towards himself. Like, I think when he was a kid, it said when he was specifically 6, he had this weird fascination with Hitler. And ever since then, when he like, grew up and realized what all of the Holocaust was, he always hated himself for that, for being so naive to like believe that. So that was more of like I think that is confirmation that he is self-critical. And it's interesting because like, I think watching this film now, especially, makes it hit a little bit harder because of the whole idea of a plague, this whole idea of like questioning life.
Yeah.
I felt that a lot more because of that. I think
we're seeing,
if I watch this,
I feel like we didn't really intend to make these films so modern topical, but like we're looking at these really old films that are, like upwards of 100 years old, and they feel so poignant today because, like we are kind of seeing history repeat, and it's like, I feel like as kind of a 90s kid, I grew up in a time where the world felt new and different. And it was like a bold new frontier, and like anything could happen. But what ended up happening, but there was always like people who were like, watch history, be careful, it could come back. You see those kind of like prophets who are out there going, don't get complacent. If things look good from your perspective, it might just be your perspective. And we're really seeing in a big way, a decade or two beyond that like history is repeating. And like, we do have a lot of these old dangers, as old as the plague, for crying out loud.
Right.
We thought we had a handle, and we do have a handle on certain types of plague. And there are certain kinds that, we can regulate very easy, but also the way the world's changed, it's left us open to new kinds of the same old problem, right? Like our interconnectedness has opened the door to old problems coming back in new ways. And it's very kind of interesting that we are looking at these old films and they do feel so present. It's a little bit of a bummer.
I wanted to mention something like trailing on the last thing that you said, Danielle. Like if you watch Bergman, I don't know how many Bergman films have you seen, or if this is the first one that you've seen. But to my mind, like I don't know if I am mistaken, but he has another film called Strawberry Fields. Unless I am completely mistaken with the name, but the themes of questioning death. And the themes of the autumn of, like, he has Autumn Sonata, which is another of his films, and there is a consistency on certain philosophical themes that make you that can, I don't know, they're not a coincidence. Like a filmmaker will not do several films about this theme unless it's something that is deeply disturbing to him. And I feel that the pursuit of reason, the pursuit of meaning, was probably very. And as you say, like if you see his histories, he's probably trying to figure out, like, is this a good life? If I die, like, because to a certain degree, what John was saying, like you said, that eventually we created religion to avoid the void, to avoid the emptiness. And then when you sit and then you think about what religion offers, it's no better than emptiness and a void. I mean, it comes with the possibility, the promise of eternal torture, which is by no means. It's a boundary. It tells you do this, and then you're gonna get like heroin for the rest of your life with cherubs and shit like that, or you're gonna just burn in hell and go like, I'll take the void. Like 9 out of 9 times, like, you know what I mean. So it's clearly a pivotal part of this filmmaker.
And I do want to say, just to like be clear, that like my statement about religion is a simplification, and like I don't mean it to be all encompassing or offensive in any way to people who might watch this who are religious. Because religion does a lot of things, but I just kind of felt like, I've always felt like the impetus for its beginning is kind of afterlife, right? And explanation. But it's also a lot of just like, what are we? And then it becomes a moral compass. And I think that the morality is kind of actually an evolution of religion, as opposed to like a foundational element. But it is a big part of it, right? Like, they're in this movie, you've got the flagellants who are like, we repent, this idea that humanity's been so bad that we can only make up by punishing ourselves.
By pain.
Right? Through pain.
Sacrifice,
and that logic, I can't wrap my head around it.
It's a Roman Catholic perspective. It's like,
it was a very large.
Save us from ourselves.
Yeah, a very large portion of the population really absorbed and internalized that rhetoric of atonement through suffering.
Yeah.
As opposed to what I would kind of expect is like, to do good in place of evil. But instead it's like, let me just punish myself.
Yeah,
because I don't know how to do good, right?
Because it's simpler, and then the idea of self-pain, it's at least more relatable than the idea of like, oh, this is good, and then the next person sees it and go like, no, that's not good. So it's more complicated to do good than to inflict self-pain. So it's like the easiest way out is to just do it to yourself. I have a couple of phrases that I wrote down, and I want to just like read them back to you guys and see what it
from the film.
From the film, yes. It's interesting when we were talking about like the Squire, when he saves the girl and he goes like, I could have raped you. And what he says is that I could have raped you, but I've grown tired of that kind of love. And it's just so loaded. It's just like, so it means that he had raped. Like, this is a common practice.
He's raped and pillaged. What do you think the Crusades were?
And then he says, I've grown tired of that kind of love. And it's so loaded. But then he saves her life again. Then basically he forces her to come with him. And then you see them later embracing. I mean, you see that there is some sort of relationship happening there. But
he's also married, and he just assumes
that the wife is dead. I mean, he is such a borderline. I mean, he, as you guys say, like one line could make you like him, and another one could make you hate him. And it's so,
because that line also implies that where he was a monster, he thinks differently now. But like, how, I think it brings up a question of atonement and where it's possible. Like, where's the line? How much atrocity can you get away with and still atone and still be perceived as good, or to perceive yourself as good, right?
Right.
Yeah, Danielle?
I kind of wanted to like talk a little bit more about the Squire. I'm so bad with names, but
Johns.
When he has that moment of Johns or Jons or Johns.
It would be Jons.
It has like a little
Swedish,
Jons. Okay.
And it's actually it's the O where it's probably like Jons.
with that with the thing in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. He has I feel like I kind of touched on this already, but I thought it was so interesting how back and forth he is as a character because like you said, Jose, he does like reveal a lot about himself with the loaded things he says. Like he has raped in the past. He has like he thinks of it as a type of love, which is insane to me. But then it seems like he realizes this about himself because when he sees the I don't remember his name, but the guy who had convinced his lord to go to the Crusades in general,
Right.
it's like he
Yeah.
has this resentment for he's like, you did this to
Yeah,
me.
the thief.
So if I see you again, yeah, he's like, I'm gonna mark you so that we you know again because he has a weird self awareness of it. It's like he just goes with his own like not blasé, but like this he's like this is just who I am and I have to accept it.
Yeah. That character is strange too, in that like he gets away with his robbing the dead, right? And then what's he do? He goes to the
Right.
bar and he just causes trouble.
Yeah.
Like he takes the blacksmith's side, but he's not the offended party, right? Like he winds up torturing the actor for no good reason at all, you know? And like everybody else just like clapping along. Just like
That was so
yeah,
heartbreaking.
the horror
Because
of
he was
humanity.
like, "Did I offend anyone?"
Yeah, he's
But
literally
he
like,
he
what the hell's
genuinely
happening?
was like, "Yeah, yeah." It was very sad.
Is that why he deserves to live? You know, like
Maybe.
I was kind of I wrote down a question in my very few notes that I wrote down was like it was just about why like who lives and who dies in this film. Like why does everybody die? You know? Cuz like death tells Antonius Block that I will come for you and your companions. Right? And by that time there's like 6 of them in the last scene. Death is a 7th. I think that's probably significant. But yeah, they all die, and as does the senior actor. You know, we see a lot of death. Not necessarily the thief. He might actually live, just marked.
Yeah. Well, no, wasn't he the one who
He died. He
died
dies
of
of the plague.
plague?
I think
He's
that
not the same one.
Yeah, he's the same. He's the same one.
Oh, it's not the same guy.
No, he's the
He
same
didn't
guy.
have a
I thought it was
scar
the
in his
same guy.
face.
Oh, he did not.
He
I
did
think
it.
it was the same.
I think it was a random. I think it was just a random guy.
No,
I could
honestly,
be mistaken though.
I think it's the same guy, and then the mark.
So in that
mark was
case,
just
yeah,
a little-
everybody we know as a character basically dies.
I think they all died of the plague.
Aside
I think that's what
from-
happened.
Aside from the couple and their young child, right?
Which is the redeeming aspect that like he goes and dies peaceful. I mean, like the character of Mas von Sydow, like the knight. That's the thing. Remember that there was a part where he's saying, "I'm looking for an act. I'm looking for one meaningful thing." And then one meaningful thing is after he has that moment of peace, and he says, "I will remember this moment of peace." And then he feels like this is he had
Well,
witnessed.
and who brings that peace? It is those 3 characters.
That's the
right?
point.
Yeah.
It's the
That was
it's
such
the
a
conversation
beautiful scene.
with I'll call her the wife for the lack of a better title. I don't know what her character name is, but they're
Mia?
Mia.
oh yeah, I could look it up.
Mia or Nia.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. He has the conversation with
I
Mia.
mean, I'm not good with it. So.
The actor himself plays the liar, you know, and he's enchanted by the child, you know, like those 3 elements. I mean, the others kind of bring additional company to that scene. I did want to kind of bring us back to that scene because I feel like the
Yeah.
film turns on that scene,
Yes.
right? Where
That was
yeah, go ahead.
there were like 3 pivotal moments of like when I felt just so emotional, and that was like the midpoint of the movie, but it felt like a lot of the meaning came from that, where he had been so skeptical and he had been so almost resentful of like life, of God, of his religion, his faith, and then all of a sudden he's like, wow, this made it worth it. This
It's
like
the most
this is
life
what I'm gonna
affirming
be.
scene in the whole movie, you know. And even though it's one little scene, like, it is the scene that sticks with you, I feel like. I mean, there's several scenes that stick with you, but like, there's something about that scene. Even the way it's shot, it's so bright. Like, I mean, he does wind up kind of, when the scene ends, he goes behind the shadow of a rock to play chess with death once more. Like, he leaves the light, but that scene is it's in an open field. It's one of the few scenes in which they're not in the shade or indoors or at night. Like, most of the film is actually really dark, and this scene really stood out to me in its openness. Like, there are a couple times where they're on the shore that I guess is open, but like this one, they're lounging around. You know, it does kind of look like a painting of a beautiful day, you know, in the open. And
the idea of them like just having this humble meal of strawberries and milk, like
wine and
that
honey,
they had
you
to
know,
gather,
basically.
and it was just it, and like to see how Mia, she's the only person whose name I actually remember. It's funny. She hearing how, I guess, depressed this knight is. She just so badly was like, please, won't you have, please,
And
I
he's
just want you to
resistant
be.
at
They're
first,
so
right?
genuine.
He like doesn't want the
Yeah.
berries, and she like insists, you know, like, no, you're gonna enjoy yourself
You
for a
deserve to
moment.
have this.
Like, I can tell
Yeah.
that your introspection alone like proves to me that you're good, or that you have good in you, you know, regardless of anything else you may have done. You know, because he's very regretful of everything, but like that alone implies something good.
Yeah. And I don't know if we want to get to this point yet, but like even
Go for it.
comparing like that moment to when he finally arrives home and he sees his wife and she's like, do you regret this? And he's like, no, I have no regrets. I That hit me really hard. And then to when they finally meet death and to see how everyone's like just somber, they kind of come up and accept what's happening. He's the only one who, I guess he does accept it in a way, but he is just like immediately like, no, God, I know you're there.
He still
like,
wants
you know,
proof
he
of
just
God. He doesn't want to go without it, right?
Yeah, but it's almost like he's like, no, I know you're there. Like, I don't need the proof, but also like he still wants it, but he's just so emotional. That made me cry a little bit, just seeing him so worked up about it, and how everyone else was so like, yeah, this is my name, this is who I am, this is what I can offer,
Yeah.
or that you're taking away, and it's just like, and then what the Squire says when he says like, oh, you know, I could have given you something for your pain so you wouldn't have to feel this, but you know, why don't we just feel the thrill of being alive one last time? That whole scene just threw me for a loop, and that's
The
why I
ending's
cried.
crazy.
It was so
Everybody
many.
kind of gets their last moment, right? And the mute girl says something for the first time. She gets the last line in the scene. She says, "This is the end," right? She just states the obvious. And you know, I found myself going like, you know, why the long silence, you know, or is she actually just mute, and because this is the end, she's able to kind of speak for the first time? I was kind of wondering about what is the symbolism there with her.
Right.
But everybody else kind of gets a little something about their character in at the last moment, right? I think that also speaks to human nature, that we all kind of want to express who we are right up to the very end. And you know, and Black's wife, who we don't really get to know very well, still has a very strong character, like in like two scenes, right? That she's got. She reads us the Seventh Seal passage that we heard at the beginning of the film. She reads that in its full. Like, she's very dutiful, and at the end she's very kind of strong, and she's like, you know, she just wants to have the moment be somber and sacred, whereas, you know, Jan's is like, he wants to go down talking. You know, she's like, would you be quiet? Yes, but I do so under protest. Like, those are his final words, that he goes out under protest. I do kind of like how that moment encapsulates everybody into just like a couple of a line or two at the end
Right.
that they each get.
Right. I mean, the jester, like the family, which is probably the one thing that was worth saving in the whole thing. Is like the sensation of hope, and also it feels almost like by witnessing this jester with his visions, and then the wife keeps saying like, oh, there again with your visions, there again with your visions. He feels like the narrator, like the person that lets us see that this is actually happening, and then that witnesses and survives it, and then lives to tell the story, right?
Right. Somebody always lives to tell the story, right?
Totally, always. Otherwise, there's no story to tell.
Otherwise, there's no story.
There's no story to tell. How many stories have been lost? I have two more phrases I think that I took from that I wrote down.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we want to kind of use this as our chance to kind of wrap up.
One of them.
Yeah, let me hear what you got.
One of them I found it very funny. This movie is dark humor. It has a lot of dark humor, especially around death and the Squire and all stuff. But there's one where he says, a skull is almost as interesting as a naked woman. No, it's almost more interesting than a naked woman. And then he's just basically saying, like, people are interesting. Because I remember there is this scene where he's talking to the knight, and then the knight says most people
Who says this line?
The Squire. The Squire, I think he says it. And then because I think he says it when he's talking to the painter in the church. Yeah. He goes, a skull is almost, or maybe it was the painter who said a skull is almost more interesting than a naked woman. Just like, based on a man's oriented world, where that will cut their attention, because they're kind of like arguing the fact that most people do not trouble themselves with these philosophical and existential thoughts, and then when they're seeing the witch burn, he said, yeah, but there is always this moment in which you can't avoid but thinking about it. It's like nobody, unless you die suddenly, unless you're not aware that you're dying, like if you are aware that you are dying, like of course your mind is gonna go, even if it's for the first time in your life, you're gonna have to have these thoughts. You're gonna be questioning. You're gonna be like, is this real, or where am I going? The void, like these things will happen to every single person. I mean, in one way or another. I don't know. You guys want to comment about that? Or you want me to read the second one that I
want to hear the second one.
The second one is how are we to believe the believer if we don't believe ourselves? Like it was like faith is personal.
What a line.
Faith is like, why, like if I cannot, like everybody seems, it's like the thing that she says, like everybody sees the devil, why don't you? And it's like, why are we to believe the believers if we can't believe, or if we don't believe ourselves? And it's like, fuck, this movie. It's just like, like giving you thought.
It's got some wonderful existentialism. Can I ask you guys a personal question?
No.
I'm going to anyway. You don't have to answer.
It's a rhetorical question. It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. I just wanted to know, I'm curious though, on like maybe a sliding scale, how scary is death? Are you guys afraid of death in a big way? Like, because, you watch something like this, and I feel like depending on how you already are going in, this might make you more relaxed about death, or it might make you more anxious about it. Like, do you guys fear death in a big way? It's something I'm curious about for everybody, because I feel like so many people go through long lives and even at the end are extremely fearful. And like, to an extent, sure, but I'm just kind of curious, like in a healthy state that you both appear to be in now, is that a big fear, or is it something that you don't tend to worry about? Danielle, I guess.
I go back and forth. I think a lot of this movie made me think I felt like there was a big scale of like, death making you think of like, there's this like end where everything that will not be a thing anymore. Like there's a void. But then there's this like, there's the other side of like, you can enjoy all the beauty that life has to have and all the pain that life has to have. So I feel like when I am like calm, cool, collected, I'm like, well, yeah, I'm very accepting of like, oh yeah, well, maybe I'm gonna go through periods of my life where I suffer emotionally, physically, whatever, and then but then there's also the beautiful moments, and I take solace in that. But then I also have moments of like, what if I question like if I don't, what if I never see beauty again? What if I never get to experience
Yeah.
things? Like
What if you
I
end on
personally
a
have
bad note, right?
right,
Like, what if
right.
you die
And
burning at the stake as opposed to in your bed surrounded by loved ones, kind of a.
right. And just the uncertainty of like of that of like you don't know when it's going to end. Like I personally just was diagnosed with like a chronic illness, and it's like weird because I feel like I'm this young person who seems like they should be healthy, but then it's like you question like everything that you think could be that you thought was going to be could also not be. So it's like a game of chess. It's like you're constantly like you think you have the upper hand because you have the strategy, and then all of a sudden you're in check and you're like, oh. So personally I go back and forth with
That
that.
was really
I think that's why it made me really
that was
emotional.
really elegant and beautiful. I almost want to end on that, but Jose, if you've got if you have response, since I put out the question.
Oh, wait, now you're putting me like it's like you need to give me something to end on.
You don't have to. You can't beat that. Because I feel like that really. I feel like I just want to say, I concur.
I concur.
You know,
I
with
concur.
that, because it is a thing where it's not a constant state. And I think that as I've gotten older, I'm less often afraid of the void. But there are those moments, both when things are good and when things are bad, when the idea of not being able to have those moments later, of losing them in just like the most absolute manner, is scary, and is existentially terrifying. But I do think that most of the time, I feel like I've had enough good that even if a meteor fell out of the sky and hit my house,
right,
like I'm okay.
It'd be like peace.
You know, like I got to meet Jose. You know,
we got to meet each other. We got to do this podcast. We got to talk about
we
these.
got to do this podcast. You know, I met my wife, who's amazing, and like have had again and again great moments there, and like I have witnessed awful tragedy and deep pain to the point where sometimes I wonder if I'm almost numb to it, you know? So like, because I feel like the older I get, the more depth of experience I've got, the more I'm kind of okay with the idea.
We did, right.
You know, but that's not to say that it's constant. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with just how it shifts, you know, depending on where you're at. But I want to go out like Antonius Block saying I have no regrets. You know, that's the goal. And I feel like most of the time I have no regrets. You know, there's other negative emotions, but that's one I tend to avoid because, you know, if you regret something, that means you would undo it, and that means you would change your present. And, you know, I hate the idea of that. All right, Jose, you want to take us out with something?
I mean, I have to concur.
No pressure.
I go back and forth on these. For some reason, like in the last couple of years, the idea of dying has been like nothing is happening to me, nothing is that. But for some reason, the idea got stuck, and I've been thinking about it, and then I go through my moments in which it's terrifying. The idea of dying is terrifying, and others in which it feels that that is something that I want to welcome at some point. And I feel more inclined towards the void because you won't feel the void. Because the void is, you know, like this is what I do.
You can remember the void if you just think about before you were born.
Like, think about this. Every time that you wake up in the morning, you're regaining consciousness, right? And then if you
yeah.
I
imagine,
know, I dream all night long, so I really actually don't know.
but still, when you're
All night,
dreaming,
every night.
when you're dreaming, you are in this state in which reality is all like mash up, and then you don't really it's subjective, and then sometimes you just wake up and then you're like, oh fuck, oh yeah, I'm alive. And I feel like if death is that sleep in which you just don't wake up, it doesn't seem that bad. Because I wouldn't like my worries. There would be no.
You won't
worries,
have the ability to know fear, right?
Exactly.
You won't have the ability
Exactly.
to know pain or to know terror anymore.
This is
and
why,
so, like, the idea that you would be afraid of it is
going to
almost
dilute.
laughable
I mean, the moment
in the face of that, right?
Right. I mean, I there's two things that I want to mention before we go. One of them, there is this movie with Nicolas Cage. I don't remember the movie, but he drives an ambulance or something like that. He's an EMT.
Wait, Bringing Out the Dead.
So, bringing out is
It's
that
called Bringing Out the Dead. It's
Okay.
Scorsese.
Yeah, correct. And then there is a line where he says, like, we start dying from the moment that we're born, and it's just like your life is that your life is just your body growing and deteriorating. So basically, you are like you're playing chess with your constantly.
I mean, that's why I feel like we put so much tragedy on young death,
Yeah,
right? Because it's like you didn't even have the chance to have what little there is, to have experience. That's all there is, right?
You know what? It's like I feel that one of the biggest thing that we can take out of this movie, it's the fact that like he went to a fucking war for God, right? Like his life is interesting, it's full, it's moving, it's doing all these things, and yet he comes back and then he sees death and then he says, I need one thing to do to, like, after everything he has done. And it makes me remember that is this phrase from maybe from a Greek philosopher, I don't remember who said it, wealth is not about having too many things, it's about having fewer ones. And it's almost like saying it
Might just be a proverb.
right, it's like if you're gonna die, then you're gonna like if you are in the presence of death, you start moving faster than you moved before because you want to just not go with regret. And regret is probably simply the fact of saying being content with what you have and then find the beauty on it, than trying to change your complete reality because that's what media tells us to do. It's like change the world, make it better,
Have the perfect
leave the
life.
world a better place that you found it. And it's
Right.
all this pressure when maybe just an afternoon with your mom and your dad or your dog or your wife or your son or something could fulfill you in
Or
such a
five
way.
strangers and
That
a
you
little
say-
bit
you
of music
say,
on
like-
the hillside. And
Right,
strawberries.
like it's I think it's a very reflective thing. It's not about leaving ambition behind. It's about understanding that. I mean, I met Danielle now. I did this podcast. I know that my life could not be the same since the moment I met you. I know that I have influenced your life in a certain way. So why is that not enough? Why could you just go and say, like, it doesn't have to be 1 billion people. It could be just like paying for somebody's tuition one day, giving a person $5 in the street when they are waiting for only one, and then seeing their face light up and you go, nobody ever gives me $5. Like if that doesn't count, then what do you fucking want, right? It's like this man found a reason to die peacefully from strawberries and milk. Like it's after fighting
And on
a
that
war
note,
for God.
I think we'll wrap up.
Yes,
this
wrap it.
this got kind of heavy. A lot of these older movies are very existential and heavy, and I think our
I love it, though.
conversation's
It's
gonna
like-
reflect that. That's what
it's
good
like-
art's for, though, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like we get to talk about the thing that we all think we're the only ones thinking about. It.
Yeah, and
Did
you
that
have
make
these
sense?
moments
Where
where you see something on film, and it's really digging into something where you're like, oh wow, like somebody else not only has had a similar thought, but like went through the effort to make a whole film about it.
Ah,
Like the shared human experience is what it's all about. Life is a
It was like-
paradox, and this has been Views in Paradox.
Yeah.
I've been your host, John in Paradox. You can find me on Instagram at John in Paradox. You can find our show Instagram at Views in Paradox. It's a good one. And join us on Facebook at the Views in Paradox Film Club Collective. As of recording, I just changed the name, but it will have been that way for some time by the time you see this. Jose, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm enjoying this series very, very much.
Yeah. Danielle, thank you for joining us as well.
As always, thank you for having me. I very thoroughly enjoy being a part of this podcast. If you want to find me, I am on Instagram at Danielle Stories, exactly how you would think it would be spelled. Yeah.
All right. And next week, we are going to be diving into Seven Samurai. We've got kind of a sevens thing going on. I think that film will have some new themes for us, but some similar ones as well. Have you seen it, Danielle? Have you seen?
I have not.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of examples of
references
it because
to
it's just
it
so
and,
visually.
Yeah. I think so. I'm the only one who's seen this one.
Yeah.
It is our longest film yet, so
wow.
be prepared. I feel like that's why a lot of people don't watch it. Is just the 3-hour
It's
tag.
3.5 hours.
It's just a little over 3.
Okay.
So it's not as long as
excited.
The Irishman, but it is pretty long.
Right.
I'm excited. I'm excited.
It's a good one.
A lot to digest.
I think you guys are gonna like it. And until next time, everyone. This has been VIP Classics. Watch more movies.